Good morning. My name is Elvin Rodriguez, and this is my lovely wife, Lynette, and my dear mom, Juanita. I have the incredible privilege of being the principal organist at LAC since September 2011, and an active participant and co-worshiper with all of you. I would like to say that this living letter is really my family's living letter. While I could easily speak to you about every member of my family and how God has moved and worked in powerful ways in their lives, I will concentrate instead today's letter on how our family made it to the United States from Cuba. I was born into a happy Christian family consisting of 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I broke the tie. The youngest sibling when I was born was already 18 years old. My 2 brothers were pastors in Cuba, and the eldest of my siblings, my sister, was married to a pastor as well. My family was a very united family, and music and ministry were an integral part of their lives. In fact, before I was born, my siblings would sing as a mixed quartet throughout the island. Although from a child's viewpoint, I thought things were great, I clearly didn't understand the struggles my parents went through for the basic commodities that we take for granted in this great nation. I do remember the one and only Christmas we celebrated before communism banned any such celebrations. I also remember having to go to the town's quote-unquote supermarket, which really looked more like a post office, where we were given the prescribed food rations for our family. These were meager portions, and my father had to work very hard to find supplemental food for the family. Truth be told, communist Cuba was a very difficult place to live for many reasons, especially when it came to religion. We were not allowed to openly invite anyone to church, and we were restricted in how we worshiped. In fact, in some places, churches were closed, and the only way to have church was in people's houses with others who they trusted. When I was still fairly little, one of my brothers came one day to talk to my parents and proposed a terrible, frightening, and yet almost inevitable plan. My brother suggested that my parents take my sister and myself and move to the United States under a new plan that existed between the United States and Cuba. His reasonings were simple. Both my sister and I had very little opportunities in the increasingly restrictive communist system, and young boys were being taken away from parents and being placed in training schools in unknown locations in Cuba and even outside of Cuba, where they were taught communism and given a trade based on their apparent talents. It was common for parents to not see their children until they were older teens or young adults. In order for our immediate family to have a chance of leaving, my sister's husband, who was forced out of Cuba when all foreigners were expelled, he had to claim my sister and my parents and I. This petition was to allow us to leave within 3 months. However, it also meant that in order to qualify for a number to leave, all able-bodied persons hoping to leave would have to commit to working in a hard labor camp under inhumane conditions, including being tagged with a number and treated more like a herd of people in a concentration camp. Those of us under the plan would have to know that at any time, an immigration officer would come unannounced and give you the news that you were leaving Cuba. This meant that you had 10 or 15 minutes to take your only allowed suitcase, and then they would close the house and everything in and about the house would become state property. Furthermore, because you were leaving Cuba, you were treated as traitors and were verbally abused and treated very badly. My parents, upon much prayer and yet incredible agony, decided to follow the plan, knowing that perhaps they would never see the family again. Unfortunately for us, and especially for my sister and father, they closed this program, and so although we were still issued numbers to leave, we were given numbers that were at the end of the list, which meant that the 3 months of labor camp turned into 32 months of torture for our family. I'll never forget March 1, 1971, when my dad and I were coming back from and upon reaching home, finding an immigration officer with my mom already outside of the closed house with neighbors waiting for us to arrive. From that night until 9 days later, we were without a home and living with my sister, awaiting our turn to fly out. Due to family who lived in California, we settled in Riverside, where I did most of my growing up. I could tell you about the countless months where my parents had no news of the family in Cuba. The mail would often be opened and it would not make its destination. The same thing happened on their end with their correspondence. I remember the suffering my parents endured. However, I also remember their faithfulness in believing that God would do the miracle of uniting our family. Even if reality painted a very different and bleak picture. After 8 unbelievably long and painful years in a foreign land that we now called home, and after countless efforts by my parents, we had the good fortune of having one of my brothers and his family make it to the United States via Spain in December of 1979. After that incredible experience, the Lord worked in mighty ways, and by 1984, after 13 years separated, we were all united again. Looking back to that horrible time, my parents often felt very lonely and greatly missed their children and their family. However, it is in the looking back that we see God's incredible and unfaltering hand making the improbable things probable, to allow for the impossible to become possible. It's been 40 years since the beginning of that journey. My siblings have all had successful lives in countless churches as pastors, and most of them are retired or retiring soon. My father is no longer with us, having lost him in 2006 to a stroke. However, we have the great joy of having my mom still with us. We celebrated her 90th birthday this past January, and she's here today as a witness to the great things God has done in her life, in all of our lives. I'm blessed also to have my sister and her wonderful husband who initially made the petition for us to come to the United States with us to celebrate this occasion and this opportunity to be a witness for how the Lord has worked in our lives. God is still a God of possibilities. Praise be to God. My life is a living letter to the world from Christ. It is a letter written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. It is a letter written not on a tablet of stone, but on the tablet of my heart. It is a letter written to His glory. Praise the Lord.